There are places on this earth where the land remembers everything. Every scream, every footprint, every soul that never made it home. Across the world, people vanish under impossible circumstances. Voices are heard where no one stands, and creatures older than the history still walk among us, hidden in the dark. Tonight, we open the files no one was meant to find. Witness accounts, government cover-ups, and the monsters that were never supposed to be real. From cursed highways and haunted forests, to the deadly monsters that follow. This is Project Black Garden, a Monsters and Myths podcast. Season 3, The Lotus Files. File number 135. The Yowie. I'm your host, Michael. Are you ready to begin? What is a Yowie? The Yowie is Australia's most famous and infamous cryptid. A towering ape-like humanoid said to stalk the bush, mountains, and rainforests of the outback. Eyewitnesses describe it as 7 to 10 feet tall, covered in black, reddish, or brown hair, with glowing or reflective eyes, a broad chest, extremely long arms, and massive footprints. Known, famously, by its terrifying roar or guttural howl that sounds almost human. Many compare it to Bigfoot, but Aboriginal cultures say the truth is far older and far darker. Long before Europeans arrived, Aboriginal tribes across Australia had stories of beings called Yowie, Quinkin, Junjidi. These were not simply animals. They were spirit creatures, ancient watchers of sacred land. Some tribes believed the Yowie was a punisher of those who broke tribal law, a protector of sacred places, or the twisted remains of humans who turned against their people. In some legends, a man who commits murder or betrayal is cursed and transformed into a Yowie, doomed to wander the wild forever, half human, half beast. In early European encounters, when settlers arrived, they brought guns, horses, and steel, and quickly realized something else was already there. A giant humanoid figure watching them from the tree lines. It had horrible screams at night, large footprints left in riverbeds, thick in the mud. Livestock being killed and dragged into the forest. In 1849, one group described a creature, half man, half beast, with eyes that burned like fire. By the late 1800s, newspapers openly referred to the creature as the Australian gorilla. But it wasn't an ape. It was something much worse. In more modern encounters, the Yowie's hunting behavior is described as disturbing. Yowies are reported to throw rocks at humans, mimic human voices, stalk campers for hours, move without a sound, and disappear instantly into thick brush. Many hikers say they feel a crushing sensation of being watched by something ancient but intelligent. But most terrifying of all, sometimes people never return. But what is the Yowie really? There are three main theories. 1. A relic hominid, a surviving prehistoric species, a distant cousin of humans that evolved in isolation for tens of thousands of years. Option 2. A spirit being, kind of like an ancient Dreamtime guardian that exists between the physical and the spiritual world. And finally, a cursed human, once human but now a predator, forever trapped between two forms. This would explain its human-like cries, its strategic hunting, and emotional rage. The Aboriginal lore says the Yowie does not hunt for food. It attacks. It hunts for punishment. Those who violate sacred land, kill without honor, or enter forbidden territory. They're marked by the Yowie. Yowie attacks are often buried and hidden from the public, such as the attack in 1847 in the Blue Mountains of New South Wales. The shepherds thought it was a brush fire. A deep orange glow flickered through the eucalyptus trees as night fell. Then came the sound. Not crackling flames, but heavy breathing, like a giant bellows drawing in air. 3 men were driving sheep across the burned ridge when they heard a woman screaming for help from the forest. They followed it. Unfortunately, that was a mistake. The screaming suddenly stopped, replaced by a bone-rattling roar. Something massive charged out of the smoke. The creature was at least 9 feet tall, its fur matted with ash, its eyes glowing like embers. It grabbed one shepherd by the leg and smashed him against a tree until his spine snapped. Another man was thrown 30 feet down a ravine. The last survivor ran. Behind him, he heard the creature laughing, a horrible, broken sound that still sounded human. When authorities returned, they found blood and massive footprints that stopped abruptly at the edge of a cliff, as if the Yowie had vanished into thin air. In 1973, in the Daintree rainforests of Queensland, 4 university students went hiking into the rainforest to map a waterfall. On the second night, they began hearing their own names whispered from the jungle. The voices were perfect, familiar, even loving. One student followed the sound of his girlfriend calling him. He was found later suspended in a tree, his body twisted as if he'd been dropped from a great height. The others ran. They reported seeing a dark, shaggy figure moving through the canopy, climbing and leaping through branches faster than anything human. It threw stones at them as they fled, deliberately aiming for their heads. Only 2 made it back. One refused to speak about the incident ever again. The other one was quoted as saying, "It knew how to sound like us. It wanted us. Like it wanted to wear us." And finally, in 2019, in the plains of Western Australia, a long-haul truck driver hit something huge crossing the highway at 2:13 a.m. The impact crushed the front of the truck. When the driver stepped out, he saw a massive humanoid shape standing upright in the headlights, bleeding but not wounded enough to fall. The creature looked at him, and quickly it charged. The man barely escaped into his cab as the Yowie punched through the windshield, trying to reach him. It roared so loudly the truck's alarms malfunctioned. Road cameras captured a towering silhouette dragging a body into the darkness minutes later. The footage was seized. And publicly, the official cause of the accident was large animal collision. But no animal walks away from a semi-truck at 70 miles per hour. Now, this file comes from an interview that my great Uncle Sam conducted with the lone survivor from one of the worst Yowie incidents on record. This one is so bad that it was known to be used as a horror story you would tell to scare people around the campfire. But my great Uncle Sam had too much respect for the fallen victims and the horror they went through that weekend in the horrifying outback of Australia. The names have been changed, obviously, but our one survivor, we'll call her Claire. And this is the story she told. They chose the outback because it felt unreal, otherworldly, beautiful, with just a hint of danger, an adventure these friends would hope to tell their kids about one day. Jess called it Mars with beer. Luke said it was the last place on Earth where nothing could touch them. Ethan liked that there was no cell service, no bosses, no parents, and most of all, no consequences. Mara, who was getting over one of the worst breakups in her lifetime, was just there, pretending she was brave. And Claire, well, she only went because Mara asked her to. And that's what best friends do. They had been best friends since freshman year, roommates, study partners, and most of all, secret keepers. Claire knew Mara's laugh, her tells, the way she chewed the inside of her lip when she was nervous. Mara trusted Claire more than anyone alive. And that mattered in the end. On night one, they camped beside a dry riverbed, red dirt stretching forever under a sky full of stars that looked close enough to grab. The fire popped and crackled, beer cans piled up, music played loudly from a dying phone speaker. Jess and Ethan were already drunk and arguing, half flirting, half fighting. It was their thing. Luke sat too close to the fire, staring into it like he wanted something to come out. He had been off, edgy, all day, snapping at everyone, not enjoying himself. And Mara stuck close to Claire. After too many drinks and too much sun, they were all winding down. Mara leaned in and asked Claire, "Do you hear that?" Claire listened. All she could hear was the wind, maybe some insects. "It's probably nothing," she said. That was the first lie. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream. It came after midnight. Not loud, not sudden, but a long, stretching scream, like someone being pulled apart inch by inch. It was horrendous. It echoed through the outback. Luke stood up shocked, immediately fumbling over his own words. Jesus, I hope that's a dingo. Yeah, it's probably a dingo. Nervously, Jess laughed. Or one of you idiots messing around. Luke found his courage and grabbed the flashlight. Watch this. He started to whip it around through the night air. The beam cut through the scrub and froze when they first saw it. Claire saw it first, the shape behind him. It was crouched low, almost hidden, hair hanging in thick, filthy ropes. Then it unfolded upward. It got taller, too tall, and wider. It didn't look natural. Its shape was wrong in a way her brain didn't know how to name. The light from the flashlight caught its eyes. They were glowing white, reflective, and intelligent. It shook its fur and stepped forward, as if in warning that said, "It's already too late." Luke didn't even have time to turn before both of its hands closed around his head. They were gigantic. Instantly, there was a sound like snapping celery, and his body dropped, twitching, to the ground. The thing lifted him by one leg and dragged him screaming into the trees. It was impossibly strong, and it happened so fast. Everyone was in shock. Claire heard teeth sink into flesh. She heard bones cracking, the sound of something monstrous chewing, slow, heavy, and patient, as if enjoying every bite. Jess began to cry uncontrollably. Ethan, in full-blown panic, was shouting Luke's name over and over again. Mara couldn't move. But Claire, she snapped forward, as if awaking from a dream. She grabbed Mara's wrist, and they both ran. The rest followed, but they didn't get far. Ethan, in his delirious state, tripped over a root and went down hard. But before Claire could reach him, the thing came out of the dark on all fours, fast and silent, smashing into him with a wet thud. It bit into his stomach, but it wasn't a killing bite. It was a feeding bite. Ethan bellowed as it tore into him, his hands clawing uselessly at the monster's strong arms. Steam rose from his wounds from his body in the cold night air. The creature leaned in, tearing and chewing, swallowing while he was still alive. Jess turned to run, but the horror had taken root, and she got sick everywhere. And that's all the Yowie needed, was the brief moment. A rock, large and unstoppable, flew out of the darkness and hit her in the back. She folded forward with a scream as her spine shattered. The Yowie stomped up to her, picked her up by the arm, and bit it off at the shoulder. Blood sprayed across the scrub. It was an impossible nightmare. It continued to chew more violently while Jess continued screaming until she finally stopped. Claire didn't look back again and grabbed Mara by the shoulders and pushed her forward. They both ran with every bit of energy they had left. They ran for what felt like hours. The terrain was brutal and showed them no mercy as they were covered in filth and scratches. By dawn, Claire and Mara had found an old, dusty riverbed. They hid under some old, dead brush, digging themselves in like ticks, petrified and exhausted. Flies had already started gathering on their blood-soaked clothes. Mara was shaking violently. She whispered apologies to people who would never hear them. Claire held her hand, trying to keep her calm, but more importantly, trying not to pass out. "I won't leave you," she promised Mara. Unfortunately, that was the second lie. And moments later, they weren't alone anymore. The smell came first. Rot, blood, something animal and old. Then, unbelievably, a voice followed. It was familiar, yet impossible. It said one word: Claire. It was Jess's voice. It sounded soft and hurt, but almost perfect. It didn't make any sense. Mara sobbed, with her eyes widening. "She's alive. I knew it." The voice came again, this time closer. "Mara, help me." Claire felt her stomach drop. She knew that voice too well, and it was wrong. It was too clean, too deliberate. It sounded so real that it had to be fake. Claire placed a hand on Mara's chest and said, "Don't move." Mara fought her and pulled away. "But what if that's her?" Mara stood up quickly, and Claire grabbed at her. "It's not her." Mara, now in a panic, hollered back, "You don't know that." She jumped forward and ran toward the trees, toward the impossible voice of their fallen friend. The Yowie dropped from above, its limbs flailing. It hit Mara so hard her skull split open on a rock. The sound echoed. Her body twitched once, signaling it was done. And just as quickly, she was dragged off, leaving a dark smear across the dirt. And in a matter of seconds, Claire heard that horrendous sound again. The monster was feeding again. How could it possibly still be hungry? She covered her mouth so she wouldn't scream and give away her location. When she found the courage, she ran again, but the Yowie followed her. The chase was slow and methodical and lasted until after sunset. Claire got turned around, and before you know it, she was coming back up to the riverbed where Mara had fallen. Unfortunately, she saw what was left of Mara. Ribs stripped bare, face ruined, fingers chewed down to the white nubs. She didn't know it at the time, but the Yowie watched her reaction, head tilted with curiosity. And that's when something dawned on Claire. She understood. It didn't just chase prey. It broke them, as if some kind of horrible punishment for being the weaker species. Quickly, she took Mara's torn backpack, smeared it with blood, tied it to a low branch, and screamed. She screamed until her throat felt like it was tearing apart. The creature charged the sound, ready for its final meal. And in its wild attack, it tore into the backpack without any hesitation. And had it taken a moment to assess what Claire had waiting for it, it maybe would have seen the bloody, charred rib bone that she had placed just inside the backpack. It impaled the Yowie in his jaw, slicing through its cheek and face. Blood poured to the ground, and it howled like nothing Claire had ever heard before. It roared, ripping the chunk of bone from its face, but Claire didn't stay to watch. She ran as fast as she could, and harder than she's ever done in her entire life. Never looking back. She ran and ran and didn't stop until a set of headlights burned her eyes from the distance. She ran for them even harder, blood in her throat, wheezing in shock, until hands grabbed her shoulders. The set of rangers and police who had been called had her now, their voices blurring into one. She didn't know if she was safe, but she knew she could finally stop running. And before she passed out, she wailed, "It ate them all." She passed out, and they wrapped her in a warm blanket. They noted she was in deep shock, dehydrated, and had a dislocated shoulder and possibly 2 sprained ankles. They said they found no animal tracks and no signs of her friends. When she awoke in the hospital and was debriefed about what they had found, which was nothing, Claire went silent. No matter how many questions they asked, no matter how polite, she wouldn't answer them. She just stared past them. And she knew, deep in the outback, in the dark bush, there was something full and satisfied in waiting for its next meal. My great uncle Sam has had many documented encounters with cryptids such as the Yowie. All of them super violent, horrifying, and always deadly. According to the file, it is not known what happened to Claire since then. Some say she died, some say she disappeared on purpose, some say she was relocated by the government themselves. Either way, the sightings continue heavily in Australia, but a more violent version of Sasquatch has been reported recently in the States. Could it be the Yowie has made its way to this side of the world? All right, gardeners, this was a good one. I hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to share, comment, and subscribe so you're up to date on the latest file that drops. Next time, we'll tackle one of America's great myths and monsters, the Wendigo. So come back and have a scare. So we'll see you next time. I'm your host, Michael, and this has been Project Black Garden, a Monsters and Myths podcast, Season 3, The Lotus Files. And remember, monsters are real, and the worst ones are always hungry.